Everyone in that courtroom thought Jasmine Crockett had gone too far, even the judge. But when Judge Edith Jones called out her attitude, no one expected what happened next. What Jasmine said didn't just silence the courtroom, it shook the entire country. This moment became bigger than politics. It became a lesson in power, confidence, and respect, and when the judge finally responded, the world couldn't believe her words. At the center of it all were two women, Judge Edith Jones and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, both powerful, both respected, both known for their unwavering confidence. Jasmine Crockett had built her name on boldness. A young, fearless congresswoman with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, she was never one to back down from a challenge. Her speeches in Congress had gone viral more than once. She spoke with conviction, passion, and fire, the kind that stirred hearts and silenced critics. Judge Edith Jones, on the other hand, was the embodiment of old-school authority. Known for her decades-long career, she carried herself with a kind of quiet power. Every movement was deliberate, every word measured. She had little patience for what she called dramatics, and believed the courtroom was a place for law, not emotion. That morning, Jasmine Crockett was scheduled to testify in a high-profile case involving government accountability, a topic that had already stirred controversy nationwide. She walked into the courtroom wearing a calm smile, her posture confident, her eyes focused. She was here to speak truth, not to please anyone. The moment she stepped up to the stand, the energy in the room shifted. It wasn't hostility, and it was intensity. Two powerful women, two worlds, two very different understandings of what justice looked like. As Jasmine began to speak, her voice filled the courtroom, strong, clear, and passionate. She spoke about fairness, transparency, and integrity in government. Every word was deliberate, every point backed by evidence and moral conviction. The audience was captivated. Even the court clerk seemed to pause their typing just to listen. But behind the bench, Judge Jones watched quietly, her expression unreadable. Her gaze was sharp, her fingers tapping lightly against the desk. To her, Jasmine's passion bordered on performance. She didn't like emotion clouding logic, and she had never been impressed by fiery speeches. As Jasmine continued, her tone grew stronger. She leaned forward, emphasizing every word. If accountability makes some people uncomfortable, that's not my problem. The truth isn't meant to make people feel safe, it's meant to make them see. A murmur rippled through the room. Some nodded in agreement. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Then suddenly, Judge Jones lifted her hand. "Congresswoman Crockett," she interrupted. The room fell silent. Even the clicking of the reporter's camera stopped. Jasmine froze mid-sentence and looked toward the bench. The judge leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on Jasmine. Her voice came out calm, low, but with a weight that silenced every sound in the courtroom. "Miss Crockett," she said, "perhaps if you worked on your attitude, people would take your words more seriously." Gasps filled the air. A few people in the back covered their mouths in shock. The words hung in the air like a blade, sharp and deliberate. Jasmine blinked, her lips slightly parted. The insult wasn't loud, but it cut deep. Every camera turned toward her face, waiting to capture her reaction. The silence stretched on for what felt like minutes. Reporters stared, ready to jot down every word of the confrontation. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Even the court guard seemed unsure whether to look away or stand still. And then, Jasmine slowly straightened her back. Her expression softened, but her eyes, they burned with calm fire. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply looked Judge Jones directly in the eye, unflinching, composed. Everyone held their breath, waiting for her to explode, but she didn't. In that one quiet second before Jasmine even opened her mouth, the entire courtroom could feel it. Something unforgettable was about to happen. For a moment, Jasmine stayed quiet. The room seemed to shrink around her, the weight of silence pressing against every wall. Her hands rested lightly on the wooden edge of the stand, her knuckles pale but steady, her eyes fixed on Judge Edith Jones, not in anger, not in defiance, but in sheer disbelief. The words "work on your attitude" replayed in her head like an echo she couldn't escape. All around her she could feel it. The tension, the curiosity, the judgment. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, hungry for a headline. Spectators whispered behind their hands, wondering if Jasmine Crockett, the fiery congresswoman famous for her strong opinions, was about to lose her composure in front of a federal judge. But instead of snapping back or raising her voice, Jasmine did something no one expected. She took a slow, deep breath and smiled. That smile, calm, controlled, and graceful, and said more than any outburst ever could. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't sarcasm. It was the kind of quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for. Then, in a soft but unwavering voice, Jasmine said, "With all due respect, Your Honor, my attitude is what got me here. My attitude is what gave a voice to people who never had one." The words hung in the air like lightning, still and powerful. You could hear a pin drop. Even the court reporter, who had been typing nonstop, lifted her fingers off the keyboard and stared. Judge Jones didn't respond immediately. She simply sat there studying Jasmine with an expression that was hard to read, somewhere between surprise and contemplation. But Jasmine wasn't done. Her tone was calm, yet every word carried conviction. "If standing up for truth and refusing to be silent makes people uncomfortable," she continued, "then yes, I'll wear my attitude like a badge of honor." Her voice grew stronger with each syllable. Not louder, but deeper, steadier, filled with emotion that couldn't be ignored. People in the courtroom exchanged glances. A few nodded quietly, inspired. Even those who disagreed with her politics couldn't deny the power of her words. One journalist later wrote that the air in that courtroom crackled with electricity. Another described Jasmine's composure as a masterclass in dignity under pressure. For Jasmine, this wasn't just about pride. It was about something far bigger. She had spent her life being told to tone it down, to smile more, to be less direct. But she knew, every time she had followed her instincts, every time she'd stood her ground and she had changed something somewhere, for someone who couldn't speak up for themselves. And at that moment, in that courtroom, she wasn't just defending herself. She was defending every woman, every activist, every person who'd ever been labeled too much for daring to speak truth to power. Judge Jones slowly leaned back in her chair. Her fingers stopped tapping. Her eyes softened, though her expression remained composed. She was used to authority and to silence and obedience, not to someone challenging her words with calm grace. Still, she didn't interrupt. She let Jasmine finish, and when Jasmine finally stopped speaking, the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. It wasn't the silence of judgment anymore. It was the silence of respect. Someone in the back row exhaled audibly. A journalist lowered his pen, realizing he'd just witnessed a piece of history, not because of conflict, but because of courage. In that brief exchange, Jasmine Crockett had done what few ever managed to do in a courtroom. She had shifted the energy. Her words hadn't just answered the judge, they had elevated the entire moment. Even Judge Edith Jones, for all her reputation as a strict traditionalist, couldn't hide the faint glimmer of acknowledgement in her eyes. No one spoke for a long while. The courtroom was still, the air heavy with admiration and disbelief. Jasmine stood tall, calm, unbroken, the embodiment of poise under pressure. And as the judge finally cleared her throat to respond, everyone knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Judge Edith Jones sat quietly for a few long moments after Jasmine's response. The courtroom, which had been filled with whispers and gasps only moments before, was now silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the slow tick of the courtroom clock. Judge Jones's gaze remained fixed on Jasmine Crockett, the young congresswoman who had just stood her ground with poise and grace in front of one of the toughest judges in the country. For years, Edith Jones had seen all kinds of people step into her courtroom. Nervous defendants, overconfident lawyers, polished politicians. Most crumbled the second she challenged them. That was her method. Test their composure, see if they could stand firm under pressure. But this woman was different. Jasmine didn't flinch.
She didn't argue or show arrogance.
She met criticism with calm conviction, and for the first time in years, Judge Jones found herself impressed. She sat back slightly in her leather chair, her expression softening as she studied Jasmine. The way she stood tall yet humble, confident, yet composed. The judge tapped her pen against her desk once, then set it down carefully. The entire courtroom waited. Reporters had stopped writing. Even the guards near the doors seemed frozen in place. Finally, Judge Jones exhaled slowly, folded her hands and spoke. Her voice, though still strong, carried a tone that no one had ever heard from her before. Not stern, not cold, but thoughtful. "Miss Crockett," she said, "I see your point. Passion and professionalism can coexist, but few manage to balance the two." A ripple of surprise moved through the courtroom. Those who knew Judge Jones well knew how rare it was for her to admit that someone had made a valid point. Then, after a brief pause, she leaned forward slightly and added, with something that almost sounded like admiration, "Perhaps I misjudged your attitude. It seems it comes from conviction, not arrogance." The words hit the room like a quiet revelation. For a moment, everyone was too stunned to react. This was Judge Edith Jones, a woman whose rulings were known for their precision and whose demeanor was known for its steel. Yet here she was, publicly acknowledging, then even respecting, the very woman she had just criticized minutes ago. You could see the surprise on the faces of the reporters. One of them lowered his camera in disbelief, while another scribbled furiously. Knowing this would become tomorrow's front-page headline, Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, didn't gloat or smile triumphantly. Instead, she nodded slowly, her expression gracious and composed. Then, with that same calm tone that had captivated everyone earlier, she replied, "I appreciate that, Your Honor. I believe attitude isn't disrespect, it's just courage wrapped in confidence." That line hit differently. The crowd couldn't help it. A few people in the gallery began to clap softly, the sound hesitant at first, then spreading like a wave through the room. The bailiff quickly signaled for silence, but the message had already been sent. Respect had shifted. Power had balanced itself. Judge Jones gave a small nod, not of authority but of acknowledgement, a gesture that said, "I see you. I respect you." The energy in that courtroom was no longer tense. It was something else entirely, something almost inspiring. The confrontation that had begun as a clash between old-school authority and modern boldness had turned into a rare moment of understanding. Even those who came in, skeptical about Jasmine Crockett, were now seeing her differently. She hadn't won the judge's respect with defiance, but with dignity. As Jasmine gathered her notes, preparing to leave the stand, Judge Jones said one last thing, almost under her breath, but loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Keep that conviction, Congresswoman. The world could use more of it." Jasmine looked up, smiled faintly, and replied, "Thank you, Your Honor. That means more than you know." The judge nodded once, firmly, before turning her attention back to her files. But the mood in the courtroom lingered, a quiet, powerful realization that something significant had just happened. Two strong women from different generations had faced each other, not as enemies, but as equals, and through mutual respect. They reminded everyone watching that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks calmly and changes everything. As soon as the clip hit social media, it went viral. Within hours, it was everywhere: Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. News outlets, influencers, and everyday people were all talking about the same thing. The moment Judge Edith Jones and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett changed the tone of an entire courtroom. Headlines lit up screens across the country. Judge challenges Jasmine Crockett, instantly regrets it. Congresswoman's calm response shocks federal court. A lesson in grace under fire. The short, 45-second video clip showed everything. The judge's stern tone, the tense silence, and Jasmine's calm, confident response that silenced the room. It was replayed millions of times, dissected by analysts and quoted by motivational speakers. Within a day, the video had more than 20 million views. Hashtags like #Crockett composure and attitude of courage began trending. People called her an inspiration, a role model, a symbol of strength for women everywhere, especially for those who had ever been told they were too loud, too confident, or too emotional. Comment sections were flooded with messages like, "She didn't raise her voice once, but she still shook the room. That's how you handle criticism with calm power. Jasmine just redefined what leadership looks like. Even celebrities and public figures joined in. One famous actress tweeted, "Every woman has been in Jasmine's shoes and told to fix her attitude. Today, she showed us all how to stand tall." News anchors replayed the clip again and again, calling it a turning point in how women in power are perceived. Morning talk shows debated the deeper meaning of the exchange and how society often confuses confidence with disrespect when it comes from a woman. Political analysts noted that the moment transcended party lines. It wasn't about politics anymore, and it was about poise, strength, and humanity. Even Jasmine's critics, who rarely had kind words for her, admitted one thing: her composure was undeniable. One commentator on national television said, "You don't have to agree with Congresswoman Crockett to respect what she did." That was leadership in its purest form, grace under fire. For Jasmine, it was never about going viral. She hadn't planned to make a statement. She had simply spoken her truth. But the world heard it, loud and clear. And then something unexpected happened. The next morning, Judge Edith Jones released a rare public statement. It was short, formal, but powerful. In the heat of public service, passion can sometimes be mistaken for defiance. "I commend Congresswoman Crockett for her grace and determination." That single line, from a woman known for her unshakable authority, changed everything. It silenced every rumor of tension between them. It turned what had begun as a moment of confrontation into a story of mutual respect and growth. For the first time in her long career, Judge Jones was being praised not just for her judgments, but for her humility, for her ability to recognize courage even when it came from someone challenging her authority. The media quickly shifted the narrative. What started as a clash in court became a conversation between generations of women in leadership. Talk shows invited psychologists, professors, and leaders to discuss it. They called it the Crockett-Jones moment, a new example of how empathy and strength can coexist, even in the most rigid spaces. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett continued about her duties as usual. When reporters asked her about the viral fame, she smiled and said, "I didn't plan to make headlines. I just spoke my truth. Sometimes it's not about changing the room. It's about refusing to let the room change you." That quote went viral all over again. It was printed on posters, shared in motivational reels, and used in speeches across schools and leadership workshops. And as weeks passed, both women became unlikely symbols of something deeper, proof that disagreement doesn't have to mean disrespect, and that strength can wear many faces: silence, confidence, humility, and courage. In the end, the moment wasn't remembered as a courtroom argument. It was remembered as a masterclass in respect, earned, not demanded. Weeks later, when Jasmine Crockett was invited to a televised interview, the host wasted no time bringing up the moment that had captivated the nation. Clips of her exchange with Judge Edith Jones had already been analyzed, debated, and celebrated across every social platform. But now everyone wanted to hear her own reflection, how she felt standing in that courtroom facing one of the toughest judges in America. The cameras rolled. The audience fell silent. Jasmine smiled, calm and confident, the same way she had that day in court. When the interviewer asked, "Congresswoman, people called that moment historic. How do you look back on it now?" Jasmine took a breath, thought for a moment, and said something that would once again echo across the world. "People often say I have an attitude, but what they really mean is I refuse to be silent when I see injustice. If confidence makes people uncomfortable, then maybe it's not my attitude that needs to change. Maybe it's their perception." The studio went quiet for a moment, not because her words were loud, but because they were true. That quote struck millions. It resonated far beyond politics or law. It spoke to every person who had ever been told to shrink, to soften, to know their place. Within hours, that single clip went viral again. News outlets posted it under headlines like, "Jasmine Crockett speaks again," and the internet listens. On social media, her words were shared on posters, memes, and motivational videos. People from all backgrounds, teachers, students, activists, mothers, quoted her sentence about perception versus attitude. It wasn't just a soundbite. It became a movement. Hashtags like "Mar Change the Perception" and "Our Attitude of Courage" trended for days. Even brands and organizations picked up on the message. using her quote in leadership seminars and empowerment campaigns. It became a rallying cry for self-belief, especially for women and young people who had been criticized for being too outspoken. And Jasmine didn't just inspire, she connected. She responded to comments, thanked her supporters, and reminded them that strength wasn't about shouting louder than others, but about never letting anyone silence your truth. Then, in a surprising twist, Judge Edith Jones herself made headlines once more. During a keynote address at a university law forum, she referenced that courtroom day, the day that had started as a clash and ended as a lesson. In front of hundreds of law students, she said, "Crockett reminded me that attitude isn't rebellion, it's resilience." The audience erupted in applause. For a judge known for her strict discipline and traditional approach, those words carried deep meaning. It showed growth, humility, and mutual respect, a reminder that wisdom doesn't come only from age or position, but from the courage to listen and learn, even when challenged. That moment, two powerful women acknowledging each other's strength in different ways, became something larger than either of them. It wasn't just a courtroom story anymore. It was a symbol of understanding across generations, of respect between equals, and of what happens when passion meets purpose. Journalists called it the Crockett-Jones effect. Leadership experts studied it. Universities added it to ethics discussions. It became a case study in emotional intelligence and integrity under pressure. But for Jasmine Crockett, the meaning remained simple. When asked later how she felt about inspiring so many people, she smiled and said, "If one young woman out there sees that moment and realizes she doesn't have to apologize for being strong, then it was worth it." And that's exactly what happened. Across the country, from classrooms to offices, young women repeated her words before job interviews, speeches, and debates. Attitude isn't rebellion, it's resilience. It became a mantra of empowerment. The courtroom clash that began with tension ended as a bridge between generations, between power and empathy, between tradition and progress. One represented the old guard of justice shaped by rules and order. The other represented the bold new voice of change, built on courage and authenticity. And in that meeting point, something timeless was born, respect, because in the end, what began as a confrontation became a conversation, one that reminded millions to stay confident, stay composed, and never apologize for having an attitude that stands for truth. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful and inspiring stories. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.